And thousands turn up as Tunisia celebrates National Tai Chi and Chinese Martial Arts Day. Welcome to the program. We begin in West Africa, where Ghana's amateur boxing team is stepping up training as it prepares for the Tokyo Olympics. 3 athletes have qualified to compete in the Summer Games, and they are hoping the event will not be postponed again, despite a surge in COVID-19 infections in Japan. CGTN's Nabil Ahmed Rufai gets us underway from Accra.
Suleiman Tete punched his way to the Olympics for the first time 9 years ago. After making his debut without winning any medal, he says he's gained more experience to compete at the Olympics in Tokyo this year.
My preparation is very, very good. Now I'm ready for any tournament, and I can assure you that any tournament that I'll go, any opponent that I meet, I can beat him.
Tete and 2 other boxers of Ghana's amateur boxing team have qualified for the Olympic Games. Their preparation was cut short last year due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the postponement of the Games. Now, they are back at it again, trying to perfect their hooks and jabs.
Training is going on well. As you can see, we are still in the preparation. Although we are not in camp here, but as you can see, I'm physically fit. I'm ready to go.
Ghana has 4 Olympic medals. 3 were won in boxing.
Going into the Olympics, these athletes are not there to make up the numbers. They say their only goal is to win medals for Ghana, and they are not leaving things to chance as they step up training.
Still, there are concerns in camp whether the Olympics will come off, as Japan sees a surge in cases of COVID-19 infections. But the coaches say they are going all out to prepare for the Games.
We are here preparing, making sure that when the time is ripe, we will be able to perform. But if something happens and it's postponed again, there's nothing we can do. We will do our best to get ourselves ready until the D-Day.
Suleiman Tete says he is sharing his past Olympic experience with his team so they know what to expect when they make it to Tokyo. He hopes they can all make Ghana proud by winning medals together at the Tokyo Olympics. Nabil Ahmed Rufai, CGTN, Accra, Ghana.
Now, female sprinter Aminatu Saini from Niger can now focus on her dream of running at the Tokyo 2020 Olympics after World Athletics cleared her to compete internationally. Saini remains banned from her favored event, the 400 meters, under the contentious eligibility rules regarding athletes with differences of sexual development because of her hyperandrogenism. Her case once again brought the contentious eligibility rules regarding athletes with differences of sexual development back into the limelight. Since May 2019, World Athletics has banned hyperandrogenic women from competing in races from 400 to 1500 meters unless they agree to take medication to lower their testosterone levels, which Saini refuses to do. Saini is now focused on tearing up the track in 200 meters, where she has a 22.58 seconds lifetime best at the Tokyo Olympics.
My goal for this competition is to go at least to the final. If this is done, it would be a great satisfaction for me. However, my biggest dream is to come back from Tokyo with a medal for my country, Niger. That's why I train a lot. I would like the people of Niger and the authorities of my country to support me so that I can make the national anthem of Niger ring out in Tokyo.
When we learned that Aminatu could not participate in the Olympic Games, we took steps. We contacted the experts in Europe and America to try and understand the problem and deal with it. Finally, it was confirmed to us that she could take part in the competition. In fact, hyperandrogenic female athletes like Aminatu cannot compete in certain events in athletics. They can only compete in events under 400 meters and over 1500 meters. The World Athletics has informed us that if she does not take medication, she will only have to compete in the 100 and 200 meters.
Now, with less than 3 months to go before the 2020 Tokyo Summer Games, organizers held their first roundtable meeting of experts to discuss COVID-19 countermeasures. Games Delivery Officer Hidemasa Nakamura said the focus is now on how to hold the event safely rather than whether or not they should be held during the pandemic. This week, Tokyo 2020 organizers issued the second edition of playbooks that lay out infection prevention standards for the Olympics. The rules require daily testing of athletes and restricting their use of public transportation, which complicates logistics in more remote locations. On Friday, Japan's chief government spokesman insisted that the Olympics must not be a burden on medical systems, amid worries that daily athlete testing will tax health resources that are already stressed in fighting a resurgence of COVID-19 cases. Tokyo reported 1,027 new coronavirus cases on Thursday. That's the highest since January the 28th, during the previous emergency declaration, and 698 on Friday.
For today's discussion, as I've stated, we talked about version 2 of the playbook for athletes and explained the contents of that to the experts, and we received their feedback. For us, this roundtable is not for talking about whether or not to hold the games, but rather to seek advice on what we need in order to hold the games safely. Based on that, we received opinions. We didn't hear any opinions today on whether or not the games should be held.
Right, well, for more on the Tokyo Olympic Games, we're now joined by Olympic sports journalist and commentator Manfred Seidler, who joins us live from Johannesburg, South Africa. Manfred, the IOC and Japan have issued revised COVID-19 guidelines that, among other things, require daily testing of athletes during the Games. Are these measures going to be enough to convince those who are skeptical of Tokyo 2020 going ahead?
I think you're always, good evening. I think you're always going to have skeptics, no matter what you do. It's interesting how they're talking about just over 1,200 positives for the day, whereas in other parts of the world, for example, India, it's over 300,000 every day. And they've, of course, got a huge problem on their hands. In South Africa, we've been hovering between 800 and 1,200, 1,500 or so every day. It just goes to show how detailed and meticulous and how serious the Japanese take this pandemic, and how important it is to them to make sure that, as you heard, their medical system is not overtaxed, and that they have the resources in place to actually host the Olympics.
Worrying numbers indeed, Manfred. But why do you think there's such an urge then to continue with the Games despite the pandemic showing little to no signs of slowing down?
That's an interesting and possibly a difficult question. It's multifaceted, I would imagine. The IOC have invested billions of dollars into this event that happens every 4 years. In this case, it's a 5-year hiatus, rather. And they financially just cannot afford not to do that. And that sounds pretty harsh when you weigh it up against human lives. But I think they got to the point, and that includes the city of Tokyo as well as the Japanese government, where they've invested so much in infrastructure, effort, finances, that to not host the Olympic Games would obviously cost them financially immensely. There was obviously the huge hope that by this time around the pandemic would have either run its course or would not be as virulent as it is now. And of course that the vaccination process would be way more advanced than it is. And Japan, unfortunately, just like Germany, have been pretty slow in their vaccination rollout, and that's a problem. The quicker the vaccinations go out, the quicker things can go back to some form of normalcy. Yeah, I mean, the Japanese government is really going to have to step it up, because, as it seems, the Olympic Games will be going ahead in a very different format, but they will be going ahead.
And finally, Manfred, how does this intense debate on whether or not to continue with the Olympics affect the athletes?
Oh, immensely. It's this constant insecurity of, am I actually going to be going to the Olympics, and what shape do I need to be when? How do I plan my year to end up at the Olympics in peak condition? I was this morning at an international half marathon in Port Elizabeth in South Africa, and one of the athletes, the South African marathon, Gada Steyn, who recently broke the South African record and brought it down to 2:25:28. She said to me she doesn't actually know if she is going to be in Japan, and it's a big issue for her, because in 3 weeks' time there will be a world record attempt in Port Elizabeth again, over 50 kilometers. And she's now questioning whether she should run that 50 kilometer, chase the world record, which she should quite comfortably make, gets a bit of money out of that, or is she going to Tokyo? And she simply doesn't know. But she's now got 2 weeks at the most in which she has to make that decision. So that's just an example of how it affects athletes. It's a lot of athletes are saying, well, we're going ahead as if it's happening, we're preparing as if it's happening, and if it doesn't, so be it. It is still a huge mental issue for anybody who's preparing for a massive competition and needs to be at their peak shape. So it's a massive challenge, and I can guarantee you that the athletes that do get to Japan will either be so motivated and so focused that they're going to do incredible performances, or it's going to be the exact opposite, and they're going to be so below par that it's going to be frightening. So it's a very, very, very difficult one for every athlete to answer, and everyone is going to have their own answer.
All right, Manfred, thank you very much for your insights here on Sports Scene. Manfred Seidler, Olympic sports journalist and commentator, joining us live from Johannesburg, South Africa. You're watching Sports Scene here on CGTN. It's time for us to take a short break. Here's what's coming up. Veteran Tanzania goalkeeper Juma Kaseja speaks on the impact the global pandemic has had on his career.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panata, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
Welcome back. Now, the global pandemic has changed the way football is played and enjoyed around the world. And in Tanzania, one of the longest-serving national team goalkeepers, Juma Kaseja, has had to go for 3 months without playing last year. CGTN's Isaac Lucando met the colourful custodian and brings us more.
The COVID-19 pandemic has given 36-year-old Juma Kaseja a new appreciation for football. Tanzania's 3-month shutdown of all sporting activities in early 2020 deeply affected the goalkeeping star. Mental trauma and financial uncertainty were just some of the things he and his colleagues had to deal with.
During those months, we didn't know what would happen, when the league would resume, and what the future held. Everyone lived in fear. Everyone was unsure of when life would return to normal.
On June the 1st, 2020, Tanzania was one of the first countries in Africa to resume sporting activities following the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic. While relieved to be able to play, Kaseja says the uncertainty of earning a living from football has forced many footballers to think of other sources of income.
Even for those of us who worked in organizations where you're paid at the end of the month, life was still difficult because you had to budget things. Things got expensive. Life changed. We simply lived in the hope that things would return to normal.
The United Nations estimates that millions of jobs could be lost from the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic on the sporting industry. To cushion its members from the adverse effects of COVID-19, the World Football Governing Body FIFA last year granted $1 million each to football federations around the world, including those in Tanzania, Uganda, and Kenya. Restrictions on movement and gatherings due to the COVID-19 pandemic have made training and competitions difficult to stage in many parts of Africa. With little restrictions on sporting activities in Tanzania, footballers like Juma Kaseja not only have an opportunity to engage in the sport they love, but can also earn an income. Citing the possibility of a resurgence of coronavirus cases, critics in and outside the country viewed Tanzania's decision to resume sporting activities as reckless. 9 months later, fans say giving footballers a chance to play gives football in the country a bright future.
Naamini I believe that if there won't be a corona-like event, Tanzanian fans love football, and I believe their numbers will keep increasing in the coming seasons.
You know, for football, being in a group, discussing and meeting up somewhere to watch matches gets you psyched up, unlike being alone.
Kaseja says things have somehow returned to normal at home, but the global nature of the COVID-19 pandemic has made being cautious the only way forward. This, he says, will ensure that humanity does not leave itself vulnerable to attack on its goals. Isaac Lukando, CGTN, Dar es Salaam.
Now, on May the 8th, Africa's premier mixed martial arts promotion, the Extreme Fighting Championship, returns after more than a year. The much-anticipated event will come as a massive relief to the MMA scene, which relies heavily on the success of an organization which has itself been fighting to survive. CGTN CS Duplessis now reports.
EFC 85 will see the long-awaited return of professional mixed martial arts to the African continent after what can only be described as a devastating year for the sport and its athletes who literally live to compete in the Extreme Fighting Championship Hexagon.
With gyms shut down for almost a year, they've had no income whatsoever. So no fighting, no clients, a lot of gyms have shut down. And it can't happen soon enough, really. It's just been a lose-lose situation for fighters, but particularly in South Africa.
As you can see, I've moved from a bigger gym to a smaller gym, trying to make sure that I maintain my costs at a low and just trying to be smart about it and not spend so much money and not get enough money to pay the rentals and the overheads and stuff like that. So I moved into a smaller gym now so that we can just write this off, and after it, we will go back to a bigger gym and make it bigger and maybe bigger than it was before.
Public perception of MMA has also changed during the pandemic, from what many initially perceived as cage fighting to a sport they can get behind, especially after South African Dricus du Plessis made his debut in the Ultimate Fighting Championship off the back of a dominant career in the EFC.
It's hard to imagine, CS, that only past 2 years have we had the UFC legally available in this country. So, and EFC's been around, what, since 2008, 2009? That's 12 or 13 years of carrying the MMA, flying the MMA flag in this continent before the UFC ever got there. I mean, that's some hard yards to run. Simple answer, it's impossible to think of the mixed martial arts scene existing in Southern Africa, let alone the continent, without the EFC.
Yeah, man, it's been a long time since we have seen live EFC fights. And actually, I'm the one who closed the show last year. When I fought Lyle Karam, it was the last event. I was so lucky and blessed that I got to get that fight in just before the lockdown. And now I'm glad that EFC is coming back for the young up-and-coming fighters that need to build their records up and create an opportunity for themselves to go abroad and fight overseas.
Fighting in some of the world's top promotions remains the end goal for many MMA athletes, and it is an achievable one. Now with their fighting platform back,